Dr. Patti Peeples, and welcome to the next episode of Patti's People, sponsored by the Evidence Base. Today, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Rachael Fleurence. Rachael is a senior advisor at the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering. She also serves as senior advisor, Office of the Director at the NIH. Welcome, Rachael.
Thank you, Patti.
Rachael, let's start off with you giving us a brief overview of your career trajectory and some of the major initiatives in which you've been involved over the last few decades.
Yeah, of course. Delighted to be here. Thank you again for inviting me and looking forward to our conversation. I started my career after my PhD working in HEOR, traditional HEOR in consulting, and I did a lot of systematic reviews and cost effectiveness modeling. But then in sort of mid-career, I moved into leading larger projects. So I worked for PCORI, where I ran PCORnet, which was an attempt to improve the generation of clinical evidence in the United States. I also then moved on to improving evidence generation for medical devices. So I led a program called NEST with the FDA and medical device industry. And then in 2019, 2020, COVID hit, and I was really passionate about joining the COVID response in the United States. So I joined the NIH and was fortunate enough to be able to work on the COVID-19 diagnostics space with the Office of the Director and my boss, Dr. Collins. Dr. Collins is the former head of the NIH, and he, for the past few years, has been leading an initiative to eliminate hepatitis C in the United States. And so I've been working with him on that initiative now for a couple of years. In November 2022, AI had a major disruptive event with the arrival of ChatGPT, and I've been very interested and fascinated at looking and learning about generative AI and how it might transform our field in HEOR. So that's about the summary of the things that I've done so far in my career.
A lot of innovative work with these 4 or 5 different initiatives that you've been involved in. What's the thread that weaves through them that sort of describes Dr. Fleurence's why? What is it that draws you to those particular initiatives, and what's the similarity that runs through them?
Yeah, most of the big projects that I've worked on have been sort of considered to be potentially transformational, sort of in the ecosystem of where we are in improving kind of patient health outcomes. But none of them have been easy to do or potentially kind of obvious of how to do them. And I'd say, some have been more successful than others. I mean, we've definitely pushed the envelope with PCORnet, with NEST in the medical device space, with COVID-19 home diagnostics. But not everything, I think, has reached as far as the potential that it could have. But what really gets me excited are kind of large problems where the solution is sort of on the horizon, and it's going to take leadership and efforts and the right stakeholders to come together to really move it forward. So I think that's mainly been the thread for me, is the kind of getting excited about change, and things that kind of look like they might just be on the verge of being able to happen, but haven't quite gotten there.
Mm-hmm. So your most recent initiative is AI, and certainly there's no shortage of exciting opportunities there. What's after AI, do you think?
In the HEOR space? Well, AI in our space is really, it's more about process and how we work than sort of what we do. What we do isn't really changing. It's looking at value of medical technologies. It's looking at who should get them, how to get them to people, implementation. So the kind of what we do isn't going to change. I think the potential with AI is really kind of how we work. And so, I think there's a lot of questions right now about, is it going to be disruptive, transformative in the short term? Like, what are the limitations? And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. But in terms of kind of what we do in HEOR, I don't think that's going to change kind of dramatically. It's more
Yeah,
how
we will talk a little bit more about maybe what HER needs to do to have some dramatic changes, and we'll dig into that in a minute. Let me dig in just a bit more, kind of tug on this string a bit more. Because of all the transformative things that you've been involved in, I'm curious, have you come up with any sort of approach to your own personal science of innovation? Have you learned a process or an approach that you think works as you delve into these areas that really excite you, that really have no approach, no steps, and not even any real definition behind them? How do you approach problems like that?
So in summary, the three critical things that I've learned in order to solve these or to be part of solving these problems are, so first, patience. So things can be hard and take time.
Mhm.
Second is making sure the incentives are aligned for the different groups that need to solve the problem to be willing to engage with you. And then third is engaging the right leadership in these groups. So individual groups without the blessing of their leadership can rarely really produce or take away the obstacles that have been in place.
Thinking about those three legs of a stool in terms of the science of innovation as it relates to AI and HER, bring us up to speed of what you are focused on and how are you approaching this particular challenge?
Yeah, so I've gotten really interested in what we're calling generative AI, which is the new generation of AI that is able to create new text, new images, new content, um, not necessarily only language based, can be image based, but that's kind of this new generation of AI that has sort of hit the world in November 2022. What I've basically gotten interested in is how and if can Gen AI change how we work in HEOR. So looking at the basic activities that we engage in HEOR, systematic reviews, economic models, HTA dossiers. And so I've really tried to dig in to see how Gen AI may support this, how it works, what the limitations are.
And so you mentioned that you think AI is not going to really change what we do, but how we do it. What is the area that is the most advanced in terms of HUR incorporating this, if any? And what is the area that you think is going to be the hardest mountain for us to climb to incorporate AI in our processes?
Yeah, great question. I think so. The easiest area is really kind of dossier development. Generative AI really excels at summarizing text and generating text, especially when you give it the right, what we call prompts, so the right instructions. When that's done appropriately, it really excels at writing. So it's kind of maybe seems a little routine or mundane, but help in developing outlines of dossiers and then actually writing sections of the dossiers will certainly help with some level of productivity. But you might say that's not very exciting, right? If that's all it could do to help us. I've also been looking very closely at how it can help in systematic literature reviews. And I think the results there are mixed in that it certainly can't do a systematic review soup to nuts. So you can't prompt ChatGPT to do a complete systematic review just with a research question. But you can break down all the tasks that go into the systematic review and get help on various ones of these various parts of these tasks, especially if you're crafting the prompt to the ChatGPT, to the language model appropriately. Now, I did mention that results were mixed. That's also because the language models are not great at math in the way that we generally understand being good at math and being able to understand numbers and how you kind of do calculations, because what they do is predict the probability of the next word. They're not mathematicians. So when you start doing data extraction and sort of having it deal with numbers, it can get a little confused, and that's where you really do need human oversight and making sure that you're checking everything that it's producing for you. So in summary, sorry.
Well, at NIH, are you doing original research on different AI models, or how are you digging into this?
I've mainly been concentrating on ChatGPT, which is the OpenAI model. There are definitely, as we know, other groups that have produced large language models, and but for now, my focus has largely been on working with ChatGPT and also reviewing the literature around what the research community has been doing so far in the space of systematic reviews and economic modeling.
Mm-hmm. And then, so systematic literature review and dossiers, more baked,
Mm-hmm.
closer to a nice muffin or a plate of cookies. What is the area that's still in the ingredient or the dough form, and that is not near ready to bake at all?
So I think in economic modeling, things are still sort of very nascent. Although there's parts of the economic modeling that a ChatGPT could help with. So again, like writing up the description of the methods, if you prompt it correctly, then that it could definitely do that. Mm-hmm. There's been research presented at ISPOR on how ChatGPT can help identify parameters for economic models, and kind of maybe propose sensitivity analysis and do kind of various aspects of the tasks that might be required in economic modeling. But so far, we don't have. There's not a lot of literature around sort of the successes there in that space. I do want to add, though, one thing that ChatGPT is really excellent at is generating code that you can then run in sort of Python or R code. So you still need a certain level of expertise in terms of kind of how you work and what you're asking the code to do, but it's really excellent at generating code and then debugging code before you run the code. So again, that's likely a productivity increase once we start to kind of know how to use it properly.
Mm-hmm. So a while back, you talked about the three legs to the stool that are critical for the science of innovation. And the second one that you mentioned was aligning incentives. And the third was getting leadership all focused in the right direction. How are we doing with AI and HEOR in terms of aligning incentives as well as leadership involvement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, well, the difference between, maybe I'll start big picture saying the difference between sort of AI and the other kinds of projects I've done is that I think there's still a lot of question marks about how and whether we should use AI. Whereas, in my other projects, the answer was kind of more a resounding yes. Like, do we need better evidence generation using electronic health records? Yes. Do we need better evidence around medical devices? Yes. But I think it's still early enough that the community is still wondering, is this really going to help us? Is it really going to benefit us? Do we, what are the risks involved in using generative AI in the work that we do? So I think I just start off by saying that we're maybe at a much earlier phase of appropriate caution and just kind of exploratory about what can it do, but what are also the risks. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think right now people are, our HER community, I mean, some people are interested and they're dabbling like me with kind of, using the different systems to see what they can and cannot do. And then at an organizational level, obviously, leadership has to be a little bit more cautious because for a number of reasons. One is we don't know the quality of the work that comes out of using a generative AI tool. Second is there's a lot of concerns around bias and privacy. So, what we upload to ChatGPT can potentially be used for training. So there are, privacy security issues around that. And then, then maybe thirdly is kind of waiting to see what the HTA organizations themselves will say about the uses of generative AI in producing submissions to them. Mm-hmm.
Let's take that a little bit further. What HTAs are
Mhm.
more and less excited and more and less and more close to developing frameworks for the use of AI with HTA submissions. Can you give us a little bit of a landscape analysis of HTAs and AI?
Sure. I think the bottom line here is that the HTA that's the most ahead of the game is NICE in England. So they've just produced their statement around the use of AI in submissions. It's available publicly on the web. It will be updated as they learn more. But they're definitely the agency that are, I think, the furthest ahead in terms of public statements around AI.
Mm-hmm.
For the others, we wrote our article, myself and my colleagues, that is currently available as a preprint on the uses of generative AI in HEOR. We were able to do a quick survey, fairly informal, with a number of HTA agencies across the world, and we were able to do that through ISPOR.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found was that obviously everyone's aware, so that's good, of Gen AI and the potential of ChatGPT and other language models. They haven't yet they don't really feel yet that they have enough experience to kind of put out statements of how they expect it to be used in the submissions, but they themselves are getting engaged with it to understand what it does. Some places are using it to do systematic reviews, so I think that seems to be the most most widely used use case, are the systematic reviews. A couple of places have actually banned the use of ChatGPT internally because they just feel like they are concerned about the kind of the security and the privacy for the data that might be then used again by the large language model for their training.
Who has
so you do, yeah.
Who banned it?
I'm not sure that that's public, so I can't share like which one, but yeah, but there were a couple that were not willing to have it used until they really understood how it worked and what the implications were of using it even internally.
Mm-hmm.
So,
mm-hmm. Can you put FDA's acceptance and interest in AI in context and compare it to some of the HTAs?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll just start off by saying I'm not an expert with the FDA piece, but I can say a little bit from kind of looking from the outside. The FDA has had to deal with AI for a number of years, not waiting for generative AI to come aboard. And that's because a lot of medical devices have started using AI algorithms in their software.
Mm-hmm.
So FDA has been grappling with, how to wrestle with AI when used in software producing results or potential diagnostic results for patients for a number of years now. And they have a number of, as you know, guidances out there on how to handle software as a medical device. They had a pilot with a number of companies that develop that use software in their medical devices, and they've come out with a number of guidances. They've definitely started to look at the potential impact of the use of AI in clinical trials. So, how does that impact their regulatory trials, their registration trials? So I think they come at it obviously from a different angle than the HTAs, which are, looking at technologies that are a lot further along and they're really looking for their reimbursement pathway by the time they get to the HTA agencies.
If you had the opportunity to sit down with the head of an HEOR department and their CEO and advise them on how to incorporate AI exploratorially in the HEOR processes, what would you advise?
Well, first I would definitely advise to do so. So I think it's smart to start exploring how Gen AI might help improve the productivity of kind of how we work in HEOR. My main, so I would say to offer training to the folks that are interested in doing that. And I'd say to go about it by doing parallel processes. So continuing the traditional way people work, but then also generating output using generative AI and then comparing both. The key with generative AI is that any company submitting a dossier will be responsible for the dossier that they submit, however they put that dossier together. So whether they use generative AI or not, they're responsible for what goes to the HTA agency. So the understanding how to double check all the content that comes out using generative AI and how close it is to sort of what you'd expect using your traditional methods, I think is going to be really key as we learn how to use it. But there's no better way to learn than just kind of rolling up your sleeves and sort of playing around with ChatGPT. There's more sophisticated ways to use the OpenAI models than just using ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is very accessible to people who may not be trained in how to do programming and go kind of to the extra levels.
Yeah. Looking one step further, do you have any thoughts or advice for journals in terms of monitoring and controlling, if you will, the use of AI for the submission of articles?
Yeah. I mean, my position on journals, I think it's a great question, but my position is that, the first author and their colleagues and the senior author are really responsible for what goes to the journal. So, if they've used ChatGPT or other models to generate some content, if they're comfortable with the content, the final content, if they've fact-checked it, if they're happy with the language, I don't really see a problem in people using ChatGPT to generate some of that. The risk, I think the risk is going to be people being sloppy and sort of, sort of submitting things that maybe haven't been properly fact-checked and reviewed. So that's the risk. But the journal, that's going to be the role of the journal editors and the reviewers to kind of pick up on the. But I personally don't see a problem in people using ChatGPT as a sort of productivity tool to kind of increase their ability to do things faster, sometimes better.
So certainly you can't read anything about AI and certainly in the HUR arena without talking about biases. What are some of the biases that are particularly on your mind at the moment?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question, and certainly again in the article that we wrote a couple of months ago that's out as a preprint, we list at length the challenges associated with AI, including the potential bias. What people mostly speak about around bias as related to AI is that the AI models are trained on potentially biased materials, and therefore they're replicating biases that already exist in our system, in our healthcare system, in our data, and then might be propagating these biases in kind of results or responses that the LLM or the model is providing back to the researcher. There's not easy ways to kind of assess the level of bias in outputs. A lot of the computer science world is working on it, though. They're creating bias assessment algorithms and other kind of technical ways to kind of try and assess how much bias is in the output. So I think for now the best is to be aware that the bias that there can be bias in the results. That remember kind of that the model was trained on everything we know, and everything we know has likely incorporated biases. And then be smart about how you think about the results, about whether there should be you should be extra aware in certain areas or domains that bias could be included. But the summary of what I have to say about this is I don't think we have really easy fixes to kind of understand how bias might have propagated and whether it's in the results or not.
So that sounds like an area that requires a little bit of deeper research and deeper understanding of that construct of bias as it relates to AI specifically. You were involved in the EHR framework for data quality report that was, I believe, a joint effort between some associations. Could you please tell us a little more about that report, what's in it, where it can be accessed, and give us a few highlights from your recommendations?
Yes. So So the EHR framework was developed as a ISPOR task force, and I co-chaired the task force with Dr. Scott Ramsey, who's at University of Washington. And we, both of us in our kind of different ways, have been involved with using electronic health records for research and trying to kind of improve the evidence-based, improve real-world evidence. And we particularly focused on how should analysts, but also HTA agencies, look at the data quality that comes from using electronic health records in this space. So our framework's pretty straightforward. It's built on a number of other frameworks that have come before it, so it's not really groundbreaking. Aside from the fact that it's specifically focused on EHRs and not real world data at large, where you can have other kinds of data involved, like patient reported data or claims. So we didn't focus on that at all. We were really EHR focused. Mm-hmm. The framework itself is like two big parts. One is looking at what we call data delineation, which is describing the data. Where does it come from? How is it collected? All these kinds of things. And then the second part is looking at things like reliability and relevance. So how accurate is the data? How relevant is it to your research question? So things that you kind of expect, but we've laid them out nicely in a checklist for people to be able to kind of check off as they think about submitting EHR data-based real-world evidence to HTA agencies.
And this can be accessed where?
This can be accessed on the ISPOR website, but also as a publication in Value in Health, in the journal Value in Health.
Very good, thank you. Over the course of the few decades of your career, what is the biggest lesson that you have learned, and how has it changed you as a researcher and a thought leader?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson is patience. That's number one. And then number two is that when there are barriers and obstacles up in a field or a space, there's reasons for these obstacles, and there's often good reasons for them. And so it's not easy to remove them. And so you have to have some luck. You have to have leadership from these different parts of the ecosystem engaged with you. And sometimes you need technological disruption, as we did with the advent of the EHRs about 10 years ago, or the advent of generative AI that we had a couple of years ago. So, but technological disruption is not enough. You also need kind of these other, like, less tangible factors to be taking place as well, so you can make change.
When you think about our industry of HEOR, I'm going to ask you a variety of lightning round questions, and I want you to think about the field that you've been so much a part of, and the field that you hope that it continues to grow and develop into as you answer these. What keeps you up at night?
So two things. One is that there's so many areas that are ripe for kind of progress, disruption, movement, that just don't have enough kind of effort or interest or resources behind them to kind of move that envelope. So I think the advent of EHRs in research is an obvious example where we were so starry-eyed about how that could transform the generation of clinical evidence, and 10, 12 years on, it's still a struggle. I mean, we've made leaps and bounds, but we're still not, there in a way where you can just kind of turn a button and you get wonderful evidence generated from EHRs. So that's one, the fact that there's a lot of things out there that are ripe for change, but just haven't had enough kind of push to kind of get them there. And then the second one is that, we live in a world of limited resources, and we really have to be smarter about where we focus energy, attention, people, leadership. And I think we're still not quite great at that.
So let's dig into that. What should HEOR stop focusing on that maybe they've continued to put resources in, and they probably aren't just prioritized appropriately?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Patty. I don't have a specific answer to that, like specific, an area or a domain where I think we should stop focusing. But I do think we have to be really smart about, what's the marginal benefit of focusing on this? Like, are we really like remembering like why we're doing what? I mean, I got into this because I was interested in the space in an area with limited resources, in a world with limited resources. How can we best improve patients' lives? Like, how do we know where to focus, where to put financial resources to improve patients' lives, and where is it kind of less beneficial? And I feel like we're still not great at prioritizing where, which research question, which drug really kind of needs that push and which doesn't. And so it would be wonderful to see us better at doing research prioritization.
Mm-hmm. And how would you prioritize things? Mm-hmm. What metric would you use?
Yeah, I mean, I think impact on patients' lives. Now then, of course, we get into, how do you measure that, and do you use QALYs? Do you not use QALYs? And but we as economists, we've thought about different ways to quantify uncertainty and to look at kind of marginal benefits, marginal outcomes, and I think there's really we could be better at a kind of meta level at identifying the kind of clinical areas where patients could really benefit from additional treatments, interventions, but also identifying areas where, they're, maybe it's not perfect, but we probably don't need to put more resources in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So Rachel, you've been involved in this industry as a leader for a couple of decades, and HEOR has been a field in the U.S. since the mid-'80s. And do you think that this discipline has reached its full potential, or do you think that we have gotten distracted or sidetracked in some way? And if so, what do you recommend we refocus on?
That's a great question, Patti. I think I continue to think that HEOR has made progress as a field. I mean, it's a new field, and I like to kind of remember our beginnings, which were, how do we allocate scarce resources in a way that's kind of fair, more objective, more transparent. And if you look at the last 30 years, a number of health technology assessment agencies have been stood up, integrating these economic methods, producing objective criteria to make these decisions for governments, opening up the possibility for the public to criticize these decisions, to have input in these decisions, including patients. So in that sense, I think there's been a huge success in sort of putting this economic theory into practical organizations, institutions that take in the HEOR work that many of us produce. Now, that said, like any field and any kind of space, things do get a little can get a little traditional, or we can just check boxes. And do we always remember exactly why we're doing this and which patients we're benefiting, or are we just turning out another real world evidence analysis? I think yes, there is a risk that we forget about the big picture of why this field started, and the impact that it had in terms of creating these agencies across the world that were doing these reviews to just allocate scarce resources better. Mm-hmm. In the US, you specifically mentioned the US. I mean, obviously we're very different set up than most certainly European countries and many other countries. National health systems and HTA agencies. We, as you know, don't have a kind of the equivalent of a federal HTA agency, although we do have non-government organizations that play that role, like ICER. But I think that the methods that have been developed in HEOR, cost effectiveness, ways to make decisions under scarcity have come to the US as well, and have benefited many patients in different ways, but maybe not in the same way as we've been able to do in Europe.
Mm-hmm. It is said that the true meaning of wisdom is the courage to let go of long-held beliefs and to have some acceptance of uncertainty. You've alluded a little bit to this as you have reflected back on and noted that patience is one of the virtues and lessons that you've learned as you have done transformative work. The NIH, where you work, has actually done a study on the new science of wisdom. I'm always swayed by this particular quote that says, "We're drowning in information while we're starving for wisdom." And I think that's particularly apt in healthcare. What are you more wise to in your career and research that shows this wisdom that you have obtained over the last couple of decades?
Yeah, I think change is hard,
Mm-hmm.
and it requires patience.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not impossible when you get the right teams together, the right leaders together. We're served by technological disruptions, as I mentioned, generative AI, but years ago, EHR methods. And then, 30 years ago, the advent of health technology assessment organizations that wanted to do a better job at assessing how to reimburse treatments for patients. But it's slow, right? So I think the wisdom is we often have all the pieces of the puzzle on the table, and we might be able to make some leaps, but you do need that leadership. You need someone to champion it. You need the teams to be brought along. So that's the wisdom, is that nothing is going to happen without people, and nothing's going to happen without kind of a lot of effort and thoughtfulness, and making sure that people are motivated to make that change.
Mm-hmm. What do you wish people would say about you as a leader of these teams?
That I was never discouraged. Would be my yeah.
I like that.
That I kept going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you do too, Rachael. You've done really important work in our field, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to sit down with you and to hear some of your wisdom, and as I know that our listeners will be too. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Patti. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was great talking with you.
It was really good. Yes, thank you.